And do you have more accurate information on the full-time population compared to what the census gives? Or do you just follow what the census says?
The census is probably the best data. I mean, we could do analysis based on if people are claiming the lottery credit, but a lot of people don't know about the lottery credit, you know, because you have to fill out a form to claim it. You're also supposed to fill out a form when you move to quit claiming it. Census is probably the best data. I mean, we could do analysis based on if people are claiming the lottery credit, but a lot of people don't know about the lottery credit, you know, because you have to fill out a form.
Tim, this is Brent. I'm not able to hear anything. Okay. Okay.
Looking at the zoning map, you could argue pretty strongly this property in conjunction with.
Yeah,
the town.
I am hearing something now.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
The property arguably should have always been zoned A2, you could say. It's just that it's slightly under, it's slightly non-conforming. If we were doing this in context of a amendment to the zoning map of the town of Trade Lake, and rezone it, it would be, without even asking that property owners, we could do that and create the nonconformity. It's not significant, I don't think, and their uses are permitted, so there's no question that that's appropriate. So I'm not troubled by that slight nonconformity.
Is how I cannot read the staff comments. Would you please read them, Mr. Conroy?
Certainly. Considering approval, the following items may want to be included in the motion. Manure management plan to be implemented by 12/1/2022 if over 2 animal units. Work with county land conservation staff on developing this plan. You would just say, okay, at most it'll be a 6. They'll, you provide the plan, which you know all about, and they'll no doubt sanction it. Fine. 2, follow all local, county, state, and federal requirements for this activity. Would be permitting, if you're gonna build any shelter, barn, whatever, permits required, that would be about it.
Staff comments? Would wish to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
By Ms. Mullin?
I will make a motion to rezone the request for map 2208 for Pearson to rezone from RR2 to A1 and include all staff requirements.
The
Second.
motion that's approved by this committee would be just going to the county board
Recommendation.
for
Recommendation.
Second that motion.
second by Mr. Conroy. Any further comments? Have a roll call vote. Ms. Mullin?
Yes.
Mr. Blomberg? Still can't hear us. Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Payton?
Yes.
Mr. Conroy?
Yes.
Mr. Bickford, yes. The rezone request from RR2 to A2 has been approved to go to county board, which will be this month.
Yeah, so we'll take it to county board meeting. You don't have to be there. Normally, it's pretty process, so then we'll send you a letter afterwards telling you it's approved.
Thank you very much. Next, rezone request 22-09, Mulroy and Campbell, rezoned from RR1 to RR2. Applicant, please explain your,
So we're just looking to build indoor boat storage on the property, essentially. Boat or ATV, that kind of thing for clients.
and that will include the CUP 22-13 and afterwards.
We'll probably talk further about that. This will look into the rezoning. So there is gonna be a slightly non-conforming parcel again. A little bit narrow and a little bit less than acreage. Consider it all higher, 23 more feet on the east side.
We don't believe that option.
Asking, but, you know, it's a little bit more of a non-conforming issue than the one we just talked about because of it being over 9 acres and not quite 10, right?
It's only,
You're down in a much smaller
yeah,
conventional requirement district.
right.
That's the only question I have at this point.
Any other questions from the committee?
And the reason, our ordinance doesn't allow storage in RR1, so we have to rezone it to RR2 or larger in order to do, storage units.
In order to do the second part of it.
That's why we have to do this, and yeah, slightly under the 1.5 acres that would be required for R2 parcel. And like the 200 feet.
23 more feet would about bring it into compliance, but
Yep.
that's the question. I checked on to see if that was an option.
Any other questions from the committee for the applicant?
Please say your name.
I would like to ask that we hold the vote on this until we've discussed the conditional use permit as well, because if we weren't going to approve the CUP, the rezoning would be moot. Know what I mean?
I'll still open it for the public hearing. Are there any public comments on map
Oh, yeah, we could, under rezoning,
22-09?
sure, I'm sorry, do that first, but I'm just thinking
Yeah.
that we might vote
From
on it
RR1 to
together.
RR2. Do we have any public comments?
This
Yes,
gentleman,
please come up and state your name. Go ahead.
a moment, while we-
Yes, I'm not sure, does this go along with, number 4 too?
Yeah, that's what their follow-up one will be, is for the storage. Yeah.
And so I live in the area, I have a small petition here from the immediate people that would be impacted by the unit, and they've signed a petition, or call it a petition, be opposed to it. And if they could take this into consideration for the people that live there, that are opposed to it, and sign it,
Okay,
appreciate it, yes.
give them, give him the petition. Could you state your name, please?
Roger Brace.
Any other public comments?
I'm Richard Hibbard, I own lot 2, which should be adjacent to lot 3. And I object, I don't want to go up there and see a storage building and a fence and whatnot. I don't believe it should be granted.
Get his name?
Richard Hibbard Jr.
Richard, we're
I don't have the number, your lot is to the east or to the north?
to the east. Should be, if I'm reading the map right.
That probably is, I was just looking, I don't have the numbers on the map, I'm
Should be 3842, I believe. Yep.
ID 5501.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other public comments? There are no other public comments. I'll close the public hearing at this time. Very good.
I'd like to open, I'd like to pause the public, the vote on this one until we go further into the conditional use permit. Bring it back and vote for them in order after we've discussed that. In other words, I don't want to mix the discussion of the CUP with the rezone, because we're going to deal with them both. But so,
This is Supervisor Blomberg. I was just wondering if you're able to hear me now.
We can hear you. Yep.
can you hear us?
I indeed can. Thank you.
Okay. Permission?
Can I say one more thing? And just since they reopened the sandbar, there's a lot more traffic that runs in front of our place. Plus the snowmobile trail and the ATV trail, which I don't care about. But the extra traffic from the storage unit too, should be brought into consideration for the people that live around it.
Okay, thank you. We'll pause for a motion on the rezone request, and we'll move on to the conditional use permit 22-13, Wayne Campbell for rental storage.
You come back up now and give us more detail on how you're going to manage this thing?
So the traffic would primarily just be us or a few people that work for TM Construction that bring in the boats. Looking more at like a seasonal storage, so it would be like bringing the boats in the fall and then picking them up in the spring primarily. The traffic,
Who would be bringing the boats in?
either Trent or, just a few people that help him sometimes. Wouldn't be the individuals bringing their own boat.
It would be the individuals.
Right.
So it would be your own company that brings.
It would be the company that brings in the
Not the
boat.
individual boat owners.
Right, right. So we're looking at just building a large building, for large boats, pontoon high, 3 high, something like that. And then we would just bring them in basically in the fall, store them for the winter in dry storage, and then pick them up in the spring and deliver them to the owner.
What would you be using it for during the summer months then?
Possibly like snowmobiles and things like that, if we have clients that want those stored or for our own personal use.
Trailers, probably.
Boat traders.
How about security? So, because it's going to be all entirely inside.
Yes. Yes.
But you plan to have some motion detectors or other?
We probably would put up cameras, like cellular cameras.
It's not right on A.
Right. It's behind the sandbar.
Because it's in a somewhat isolated location, that sometimes that's vulnerable to theft and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, we would have insurance, of course, and then we'd probably put up cellular cameras.
There wouldn't be any outside storage, just inside?
No outside storage.
No, and would there be lighting that's on all the time, some of the time?
Not necessarily. If we did just on the building, it would probably be like a motion sensor.
Will you be doing maintenance of any of these, of equipment,
No.
any of the mowers?
We don't do maintenance.
Well, people would just be coming in there for.
People really wouldn't be coming in there to pick up their boats unless they just wanted to see where we were storing it or something like that. But no, it would just be us or a few people that have a company to bring them in and get them.
You get the name of the company that would be coming in?
TM Construction and Cabin Services.
On the imagery, on the sketch you submitted to show boat storage building and then in the northwest corner, another rectangle?
A smaller one, yes, for like smaller boats. Mhm.
What is the dimension for this building?
I actually don't have that copy in front of me, it's at home. I believe the large building we were looking at around 80 by 100, and then the smaller building was maybe 50 by 100. I'd have to double check on that. I put them in with the application.
That's the petition, if you just want to pass it around.
that a tar road?
No, the dirt road.
Any other questions?
When building the shed, is there gonna be fair amount of remaining screening around the area of the building?
What do you mean by
Trees?
Yeah, we're only gonna remove the trees necessary. And where we have the large building, there are no trees there. So this, where the smaller building is, like where we had proposed the smaller building up towards the road, there's a few trees there. But where the larger building would go, there are no trees, it's just grass.
I see adding fill, is that where there's?
Yeah, so it's lower.
Wetlands or?
No, it's in the front of the property, like towards A, and it's just lower ground there. But it is just grass.
Would it be visible from County Road A?
You would be able to see the building from A.
Probably 400 or 500 feet at the most from A, but it's open and lower, it almost certainly would be visible.
There's a building in front of it on A, so it would be behind that.
Right where Mosher spilled in the swamp.
Not according to the GIS website.
Wouldn't interfere with any of the ATV or snowmobile trails that are there now?
I runs down the road.
Excuse me, sir, wait till I open it up for public hearing.
Brought up extra questions.
Well, we're gonna reopen a public hearing now on this, so just hang on.
Any other questions from the committee for the applicant?
One, where the building is, there's a couple houses on the aerial photo. Are any of those 2 or 3 houses on the petition?
Not that I'm aware. Mark Smith is, I believe, the direct neighbor, and that's a storage building of his personal storage building.
Plus, there's already a storage building there.
There's 2 large storage buildings there. Smaller than this, but larger. Larger than a regular sized garage.
Any other questions from the committee?
How many boats or pontoons or whatever are you planning on?
As many as we can fit with the space that we have.
Yeah, do you have an estimate?
Ish,
Huh?
50, around 50.
So there'll be 50 trips in and 50 trips out.
Yeah, we can fit 50 folks.
I think that's what a lot of the neighbors are worried about, is having them going.
Any other questions of the applicant? If not, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Anyone wish to make any comments on the conditional use permit 2213 for rental storage?
Well, I'm just a little confused. Which side of South Bass Lake Road is lot 3 compared to lot 2? I'd be on the north side.
South side, the north side of it.
So you're right down towards, straight across the street.
Straight across the street, you know where Doug's building, that big blue building is? That's Doug Chestnut, right to the east of that. To the east of that big green building, 2 buildings that's out right there.
Get his name.
Richard Hibbert from before, but
Any other public comments? Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was wondering how they take care of the drainage problem also.
Please state your name.
Roger Brace,
Go ahead.
and I was wondering about the drainage problem there, because it's down there to the east to them, I believe it is. That, there's the low spot in the road, it does flood during the high time when it is a regular wet season because of the swamp being filled in, and there's more wetland that'll probably be filled in from what I gathered. And then also, like I say, consider the people who live there, they're, you know, they, which makes sense, but don't care for it, to be there. They're opposed to like the people coming all sorts of nights, or if they can, and other things like that.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Do you have any comments? I will close the public hearing at this time if we have no other public comment. On conditional use permit CUP 22-13, rental storage. If there is a motion, would you please read the staff comments?
Okay, I will read them, and I think then we should vote in order though on the rezone first when we do that. The staff recommendations were the committee wants to require additional screening besides what the applicant has proposed. It should be specific with type, height, width, location, et cetera. Obtain a proper land use building permits prior to each structure being constructed. Follow all sign regulations. Follow all county, state, federal, local, county, state, and federal requirements for this activity. So, my concern on this is twofold, really. We're creating a non-conforming lot and then doing a conditional use permit on the non-conforming parcel. So I think, I think they have a request that's reasonable and something that's needed in the area, but I'm not sure this is the spot to try to squeeze it in on a lot that's already, would be undersized for the district. If it was to be appealed or challenged, it might affect it. Because generally, when you create nonconformity and rezone process, you're doing that, bring something into compliance with the plan or amend the map for the public interest involved. This is not, doesn't quite rise to that standard, I don't think. For that reason, I'm questioning whether this is an appropriate rezoning or appropriate purpose to rezone.
Travel on that road as well, and I know it can get kind of ruddy. I'm concerned if they're taking the boats and the pontoons out in the spring when the road is soft, are they gonna be rebuilding the road, taking care of the road in some way to help, because it is a very sandy area. Make sure that road doesn't erode to the point where the residents can't get home.
It is a fairly developed in there, more than one would think. You drive through there.
The town has ability to override our zoning request.
In this case, I should talk about the town a little bit, because this came up in a hole that we have where the town didn't get to weigh in. I individually notified the town board, notified them if they wanted to postpone it, to let us know. They did not notify us they wanted to postpone it. So I think maybe if they didn't know and they had this many citizens, they would have, but I'm speculating on my part. But yeah, that's how that worked out, that the town did not comment.
But it is entirely within the shoreland area.
It is, and I notified them of that.
Yep.
I said
So they could not
They would
override
be
it.
advisory only, not vetoing in this case, which is probably why they didn't respond. Don't know why.
And the concern I would have would be, the goals from the comprehensive plan, just stating, ensuring environmental quality, maintaining views and open space, maintaining community character. It sounds like it's somewhat developed. I don't know if that necessarily conforms with the goals of the,
It's in an area proximate to County Road 8, sort of, but it's, don't get there directly from 8. You have to drive through a residential area to get to it. So that could be, with the level of the road that's there, gentleman who raised the point of it being wet when its water table was high, is accurate.
Any other comments from the committee?
just non-conforming things in general. As a property owner in Burnett County, how much can we rely on, when we own a property? Just kind of figuring that I know it's zoned as, my neighbor is zoned as such, and so I'm gonna buy this property for investment or enjoyment and not expect that something non-conforming would go next door. And just a thought,
Well, that's a good point. We talk all the time about trying to bring things into conformity. One we did just previously in an ag district, which is very, very close to meeting the standards for it, the old deed, because they measured it lots. It tells you how old that deed was. In any event, that was consistent with the plan for the town of Trinidad. This one is kind of contrary to the plan for the town of Jackson. Marginal. I think there are some, I wish it was big enough to be a legitimate rezoning. I wouldn't be troubled by it then. I am troubled by it.
So if there was a way that they could get those other 23 feet,
That would help, that would make it a conforming RR2 lot, not a non-conforming one. And Supervisor Anderson raises a very good point, that your expectation is no one can rezone out of conformity to do something that otherwise isn't permitted. That's the point you raised, kind of a, precedent we may not want to put ourselves into.
what we're saying is that if we deny this and they go and somehow obtain that other 23 feet, they could come back to us
Sure.
and we would
I would look at it I'd be less skeptical about it if it didn't have that flaw. And again, it doesn't mean we can't do it. We have done, we routinely rezone between public interest and create nonconformity. But then changing doing a conditional use to add a use that otherwise wouldn't be permitted comes, I think,
we're trying to find a way that they can come back and get
well,
more into
right.
conformity,
Or
is what I'm trying to.
it's a great idea. I mean, there's no doubt you need to do boat storage. Find a place with a little more acreage would be better, I think. This is a little isolated parcel that no one's using for anything, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good place to do this.
And it's in shoreline.
Yeah, it's our decision. The plan is still carries some weight, though.
how much weight, does neighbor opinion carry, just out of curiosity?
I think it's significant when pretty much everybody around there is skeptical of it.
I didn't quite, I was trying to compare names. I don't know how many were directly adjacent. I didn't look to see, who had signed it, if they were, I was trying to look at names on there.
I know a lot of people that are right next to it, they were before it, so.
They're in the neighborhood, but they're not, only Doug
Not necessarily.
Chestnut, who was immediately adjacent, didn't object, it didn't look.
And Smith too, Smith is right next door to Doug, is Mark Smith, he's for it, so.
They're again, it's,
How far away are your neighbors? How far did they come?
there isn't a number on that. But it's the issue of the road and the issue of the activity. Understand their point, all the rest of the lots are still RR1 lots. Small lots, fairly high density subdivision potential.
This is blocking anyone's view of the lake. These are already blocking the view.
enough houses over there that can't see the
You know,
Up on a height of land a ways back, it's real flat. You've been to the sandbar, kind of up and behind the sandbar, you know.
Yeah.
There's no other questions. Go back to the rezone request. Rezone from RR1 to RR2. And the motion would be for the recommendation to go to county board.
any way to wait and get an actual review from the town board, or is what you're saying as far as it's going to get what you're telling us?
The town didn't react to ask for a postponement for their agenda, partly maybe because it's a shoreline area anyway, I don't know. I think at this time though, I don't know that kicking the can down the road would change anything. So I would move to deny the rezoning request because it would create a non-conforming parcel. Proposed conditional use would not be permitted in the district that it is a conforming parcel yet. Those two things, I think, are enough to say no, even though I think they have a good plan to do something that should be done. I just don't think this is the place to do it. That would be my motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Conroy. Deny the request. Second,
I'll second that.
second by Ms. Anderson. Have a roll call vote. Ms. Mullen?
No.
No, if you vote yes
Yeah.
for the affirmative motion. I'm not telling you how to vote.
I don't.
Yes vote means,
Yes means no.
Deny.
Okay.
Followed. Mr. Blomberg?
Yes to deny.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Payden, Mr. Payden?
Yes.
Mr. Conroy?
Yes.
Mr. Bickford, yes. Motion to rezone the request from RR1 to RR2 has been denied, which means the conditional use permit CUP 2213 actually null and void because it
It's moot.
can't be permitted in RR1.
I didn't want to risk us voting yes to rezone and no on the conditional use.
Thank you very much.
Again, it's a good plan, but not for this spot. All I can see.
Move on to land services, zoning and property information division reports.
Oh, let me get there real quick here.
Okay, you did.
It has everything in that packet.
What?
It has everything in that
The
packet.
packet has everything for you right there. Yeah, so the, staff, or let's see, land services department, property information, there hasn't been any corners done because I'm so far behind on reviewing them. Staff reports are in there. You can see what the staff and that division have been working on. Budget report is in there. There's nothing out of the ordinary. We've almost hit our revenue number for the year. It is a little bit lower than last year at this time though. And the website statistics are in there, again, about that 300 users per weekday, about 100 or so users per day on the weekend on the GIS website. Zoning report, been 1,100 permits so far, 73 of those are dwellings,
New dwellings, right?
new dwellings. So, I mean, some of those could be, a tear down and then build a new building or a raw piece of land for a new house, so. And then staff reports are in there. Hopefully, we're gonna have someone starting here next week, finally. That position's been vacant for almost 6 months now.
I'm going to wonder, but expect that the person does not carry credentials, but will
They
be.
do not carry credentials, correct?
Okay,
Yeah.
they're coming from a background where they're likely to successful.
Yeah, they have a natural resources background. She works for the, she's been LTE for DNR for a few years, doing kind of like a fisheries kind of type stuff, but she went to school for natural resources, so she has a,
You gotta watch it, DNR doesn't poach those people back.
well, it's funny, because she's got 2 LTE jobs. So they're working her full-time, but not because they do 20 hours under this position and 20 hours under that position, so.
That was Dan Harrington. They
Yeah.
got him from DNR and then DNR stole him back.
Yep. So, see how that goes. But yeah, otherwise, if you have any questions on that.
Where's she from?
Spooner,
Oh, okay.
yep.
Oh, that's,
Gotta be losing her.
She shouldn't move away, I don't think, so, yeah.
well, that's gonna be a person with a lot of direct shoreland experience of working just on the other side of the high water mark.
Yep.
To the land side instead of the water.
Especially with that last name. Especially with that last name,
I didn't know that.
Thompson.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Check. I didn't think of it.
The number of new dwellings, that's still up though.
Yes. Yeah, it's surprising. A lot of people are still wanting to move up here and get out of the metro area, it seems like. With more fiber and stuff being put up here, more people can work from home up here and stuff.
Well, there was a lot of people that moved up here this past weekend, I can tell you that.
By the way, no, most of them left yesterday though.
Thanks for the bar.
How is it zoned when someone builds a shed and they live in it?
Well, they shouldn't be. So
What
how's
if they
that?
put a bathroom in it? Does that change the zoning to a dwelling?
The minute you sleep in it, it's supposed to be permitted as a dwelling.
Interesting, tricky part about that is under the UDC, if you sleep in it, it has to be UDC inspected. But if you build a detached bathroom, only, permit for private system, building, could be 10 by 10 and not even require a land use permit. Plumbing and everything to code, and it's perfectly okay to do that. Sometimes people used to do that when they were camping on their lot before they built, and they connected to the sewer later, but they did that so they had functional toilet facilities. And as long as it was legal, you know, they were okay with that. It can be abused just like anything.
So-
when you see a garage go up and it suddenly has a chalet roof, it makes one suspicious if it's gonna be a bunkhouse.
Yeah, so we allow bathrooms in garages, and some people have even asked us to prohibit that, because they think that allows for too many people to live in their garages then without proper permits and proper inspections being done.
The question is, if someone has a wood shop in their garage, though, and wants to connect it to their system, there's no more wastewater generated then, and if have to walk 100 feet to the house, right? That's the conundrum all the time.
Yeah, you know, you have a few bad apples that are maybe gonna ruin it if we prohibit bathrooms in garages ever.
Yeah, you can't camp in your shed. You can't sleep in your shed.
Nope.
Now, do lots of people do that? Oh, yes.
Yeah, if it's an overflow Labor Day weekend and the grandchildren camped out there over weekend, it's not terrible, but it's still not legal.
Yep.
But when they make it into a second home, yeah.
And how do you catch them? That's the hard part, you know. We're not sitting out there watching everybody's property. We don't want to, nor does the public want us to do that, so it happens.
Someone doesn't want to hide all the time, so.
What does happen if someone reports something? I'm just curious, like, what is the function? I mean, because it's like, I doubt there's staffing to deal with
Well, how do you prove it?
What if they put in a separate septic system?
You have people that put garages and want to put it on a holding tank because the house is 300 feet away and they don't want to connect to the house sewer. So that's still okay to have a bathroom in the garage. How do you, I mean, we have to go to court though, and we have to prove it. That's the hard part. I mean, if somebody calls and says there's, people sleeping in the garage next to me. And then I'll usually ask, well, how do you know that? Well, I see them go in there at 8 o'clock at night and they come out at 6 a.m. Okay, well, I mean, are you?
Were they sleeping?
You know that they're sleeping in there for one, and then, or are they just partying all night?
Yeah.
It's a speakeasy. And then, I gotta ask the neighbor, since I can't sit up on the witness stand, because that's hearsay, if I heard it secondhand, I asked them, are you willing to testify in court? And most of them say, I don't wanna make bad relationships with my neighbor. So there we're stuck.
And again, we're not talking a very high percentage.
Yeah.
A handful of miscreants out there, but for the most part, people do what they say they want. I looked at one time that in the upper level of this big garage was a gym. It wasn't a bedroom, as somebody had complained about. There were exercise machines all over it. And if you were gonna drive by and look at it, you'd say, well, they built a bunkhouse or a second cabin. No. Just the second floor of their garage was almost every type of device workout that's known at a main commercial gym would have was in that upper floor. That was like looking in the window.
And most of the time, how, I guess, we come across them is when they come up for sale. I had one a couple weeks ago that somebody on the lake was curious about how much the house across the lake was for sale. So then they looked online and it said, oh, it's a garage with a sleeping loft. Well, then they asked me, they're like, hey, and now all of our permits are online, so people know they can go look up their permits or anyone's permits. And that person called me and said, hey, I don't see a permit for them having a bedroom in their garage. Sure enough, I sent an email to the realtor and the owner, and they both got back to me and said, yeah, we didn't know we needed to. And I said, well, you're either gonna get it inspected and up to code or take the bedrooms out. So.
And then we also used to see that with the recreational rentals when we were suing them, as firing a condition.
Yeah.
See somebody represent North Sand Lake, a good example, home, sleeping loft, sleeps 15. The 3-bedroom house, people. Okay, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's amazing what you find online now. With people putting a lot of stuff online, that's probably our best way to catch stuff, is seeing what's for sale or,
And,
I know.
And the time of sale is a good opportunity.
Yeah.
Because they are gonna sell it. The realtor does not want to misrepresent what's legal, right? Because that can bite them. If that
Yeah.
happens.
So then, that's why I usually contact the realtor when we find those, because then they have to legally disclose it then. They can't. About it now, is the buyer still gonna do the same thing? We don't know, but at least we told them.
On the CUPs that we've approved, did anybody go back and check on it?
When we,
The one I'm questioning about is the one that we did up in Swiss he asked for 7 units there and we allowed 3.
that one. Well, he contacted me after the meeting. Do we do follow-up? There are times, pre-COVID, we would do follow-up, I think, more. Permits have been up so much since then, we haven't had the time. Or if some neighbor or someone, says, hey, it doesn't look like they're following it. Unfortunately, we rely on people to tell us a lot of these things, because we don't have.
They told me that last. I still had 7 units.
Oh, okay.
I didn't check it.
He knows he shouldn't have 7, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in Labor Day weekend, a lot of people have campers all over the place. I usually try not to get too upset when it's the, kind of the three big weekends, the Memorial, July 4th, and the Labor Day weekend, because I could literally drive around and find thousands of violations of campers and things like that on those weekends, so. Obviously.
I just didn't know if you ever followed up on, you know, if we had approved it as a 7, then there's no reason to check up on it.
Yeah. And usually if I'm in the area doing other permits, I might just pop in real quick, because, you remember, hey, you know, 2 years ago, I remember we did a project here, just pop in and see what it looks like.
Okay.
I do have a question for, you know, like any of these conditional use things. How does it work if we want to, you know, I have the aerial views and things like that, but, you know, I couldn't visualize where this was. I mean, what kind of rights do we have as far as like walking properties or I mean, we can do drive-bys, I'm sure, but.
I don't think you'd have the right to walk on the property, unless I mean, we could add maybe language to the application that says something like committee members are allowed to be on this property, so then if they sign that application, you guys would have that right?
Because I was wondering, you know, like even when,
I mean, most of the,
if you're trying to visualize
Yeah.
where, you know, when we were looking at the, you know, campground and then you want to do the manufactured homes, so trying to visualize, and you can't really tell anything. I just don't know what.
I think I mean, most of the people are wanting your approval, so I don't think they're gonna, if you're out there walking around and they catch you, what are you doing? Oh, I'm here from the committee visualizing your site.
I think
Oh, okay, that's,
to a certain extent.
yeah,
To a certain extent, I think the application process is an implied consent,
yeah,
that we can do what we need to do.
yeah.
I always explain a permit, when you get a permit from zoning, zoning is allowed to inspect the permit. You sign that we're doing it, we have to assure compliance, so we
Yep.
can check setbacks and whatnot, right?
Yep.
I think it's similar to that. But it's, you know, we don't have badges or anything, or.
Right, I was just wondering, because some of them, you know, it's like, well, there may be wetlands, there may be whatever, and it's like.
We actually do have
True, we have that, because we can show that if someone wanted to verify who we are,
Right.
but it doesn't give us any particular police powers or anything.
Does say VIP on it.
That's true. No, I've never had anybody ever tell me to leave, you know?
No, and they're asking for your approval, so I wouldn't think they would, you know, tell you to get the, you know, off my property and then expect a yes vote, you know, a couple weeks later on their request.
Okay, so you have done visits and looked, I mean, because I've, you know, walked perimeter, but I don't know, like, how far can you go in, how can you, you know?
I think I would take the position that you invited us on the property when you applied.
Like,
If they, on the other hand, if they say, get out of here, you need to go.
Yep.
Or if I take it, I don't think you'd ever be convicted of trespassing, looking at something, someone came through the county, you know, ask permission to do something.
I think you folks are having fantastic conversation this morning. I think this is exactly what, you know, we as staff really expect out of our policymakers, is really thinking about how do we deal with these challenges that we have to handle on a very regular basis. So by hearing the questions about when do we go inspect, how do we verify and look at properties and complaints, you know, this is an ongoing conversation that a lot of communities struggle with. You know, so you see some communities that put point of sale, you know, ordinances in place that then can allow them to, at the point when they're selling, trigger, you know, those aspects of maybe going in and doing inspections to make sure there aren't additional dwellings that aren't permitted or haven't gone through the right process. Very controversial in some communities, but they've elected to go that route. And then you look at other communities that have, you know, a lot of code enforcement, you know, and we've kind of taken the approach that we're going to be very passive here or truly complaint driven. And that's really been a dictation by previous committees and board members saying, okay, how active do we want to get? Because if we want to be actively enforcing the code, we're going to need more staff to be able to do it. So it's fair and consistent on how we approach every particular resident and property owner within Burnett County. So real challenges, but certainly I think things that continue to be good discussion points for you folks to really drive what it looks like for us as staff. So I can appreciate what I'm hearing this morning. Thank you. Sorry, don't mean to digress too much.
That's okay, I can't get on my iPad anyway.
For some reason, mine's working, so, because I just never signed out of it and didn't have to come back in to the internet to get to it.
Mine was still pulled up. I did, yeah. Just again, yeah.
On any zoning, like the ones that are within the lakeshore, town is still, they can raise opposition, but they cannot deny it.
Correct, yes. If it's in the shoreland area, they can weigh in, but then it's just advisory input because they don't have veto power.
When I sent them the notice that I sent, so they could, they did not tell us to postpone. I said, you have input, but you don't have veto authority because this is entirely within the shoreline.
How does shoreland zoning work within a village? The shoreland within a village.
We don't have jurisdiction within the village.
Okay, so it's different within the village.
Yeah, it gets real complicated. If a village annexed land that was post-1968 shoreland zoning, then the village would have to still stick to the county level setbacks. But villages that were in existence prior to that don't even have shoreline setbacks.
So kind of like, Crooked Lake and Clear Lake and Siren are just kind of.
The village,
Yeah.
Siren may have adopted setbacks, but it was elective, required to. Clear Lake did, for example, but.
Property that they annexed south of Clear Lake would still be within the shoreline, so
Yes.
that property would have only restrictions.
Of the counties at the time they annexed it, right?
Well,
That
they
was-
just annexed it.
That was just within the past.
Whatever we have, right?
Yeah, it gets really complicated with annex stuff.
We don't want to get into that.
So last night at the Webb Lake meeting, town hall meeting, they vacated a road, that was by Escape Drive on Lily Lake, right on the edge of Lily Lake.
Mhm.
And I asked that question at the meeting, I said, now, does this need to go to the county board because it's so close to the water? That's what they told me, they said no.
Not on a vacation, because that's not a rezone request. Road vacation, it's a town road, they're just vacating their use of it or
Yep.
their maintenance of it.
It never was built.
Yep,
The road was never built, it was
platted road.
platted in 1928.
Yeah, very common that
Then
happens.
there's a rule for allocation of that vacated right of way to.
Yep, it goes to each half typically, yep. But they have to record documents with the registered deeds office to notify everyone that vacation happened and all that, but there's no formal process that the county has to get involved on that item.
Must be here for some reason.
I think it's on.
I am. Just listen.
Move on.
Your next agenda item.
Yeah. Goals and priorities.
At our last county board meeting, I did hand out this particular document to everybody. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to take a look at it at all at this point in time, but certainly over the course of September and October, I wanted to have a conversation with every standing committee and make sure that I understand and that we as staff understand what are the three priorities and goals that you folks would like us to start focusing in on. We feel that these are really important of what you folks developed as well as what staff came up with. And so I want to recap those this morning with you folks and then again, walk away or leave this meeting with an understanding of what your 1, 2, and 3 type priorities are. So if you look at the document that was provided to you folks back in county board under land use, there's two essential colors that you can see highlighted, yellow and green. Land use did not have any blue. If you look at the other standing committees, some of them have one that's blue. So that's a goal that was identified by both the staff as well as the county board, and they both believe that that was a very important priority. Now for land use, you can see there's some differences there. And so the yellow ones again are the county board, and the number to the right of the priority or the goal are the number of votes that was provided by you folks as a county board, not specific to this committee, and it doesn't have anything to do with staff. It's just simply the votes that you folks as county board members tied to each one of these. And so when you look at the top items that you folks prioritized, the first one was to develop a better two-way communication platform between government and residents on zoning activity as well as between county and municipalities. 2, review ordinances and policies relative to legalities and new legal challenges. And then there was multiple that tied for the third, which was provide sample applications and frequently asked questions on the website, provide zoning education to towns, and water quality programs. The green items were the top 3 items that staff had developed, which were fund junk property, implement an electronic permit system, and security for public hearings. And so since you folks are the policymakers, I wanted to engage you this morning and talk about those top 3 that you folks identified. And of those 5 that are essentially identified by you folks, which ones do you feel are most important for staff to start working on? And then what we would do is our goal is to staff start working on these and bring them back at least every quarter to you so you have an understanding of where we're at and have check-in points with you folks over the next couple of years to make sure we are moving forward to achieving those goals and priorities. Now, we did this with public safety last Thursday, and some of them had some concerns on what's the cost of it, can we afford to do things that are identified as goals? I don't want you thinking about the expense behind it. That will come. And so if it's our goal and it's a priority, let's start engaging on then, does it make sense to align resources to it or not? And what do those resources look like? Now, for the ones that you folks identified here, I don't see any real expense unless you maybe get into water quality programs. Then we would, of course, have to look at what more water quality programs are out there that we don't do today and what would be the potential expense to that. But that would come by way of analyzing and incrementally looking at those particular goals and priorities. So again, this morning, I just want to be able to walk away with a consensus, hopefully, of the Land Use Committee on what 3 goals you folks would like to prioritize for staff as we move forward. And I'm going to open it up.
As I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the yellow and the green, fund junk property cleanup. Like, what would that entail? I mean, like, do we get lots of reports, or is it just because you drive around and you see lots of junk?
This actually came up a few years ago, probably back in 2014, 2015. There was kind of a push to say, okay, if we're going to start looking at our own house and making sure that we've got a clean-looking house and a good-looking property, how do we apply that to others, and what do we look at? Because we do get complaints from neighbors about junk piles and things of that nature. But it's really expensive to be able to go in and either assist them or get a court order, pay for it, and then put it on the tax rolls, which we can do. But again, we don't know exactly when we're going to get compensated for that. And so we actually went through the process of starting to have discussion about arterials. Do we look at those main arterials first and start to prioritize perhaps junk properties, if you will, or those eyesore properties that are on those main roads that people visibly see on a very regular basis, because that's part of the image of Burnett County. And if we're going to get serious about that, we are going to need some resources. We did allocate some resources, and we do still currently in the annual budget, but it's a modest amount, about $25,000, which in today's day and age, when you look at cleaning up a property, doesn't go very far at all, especially if it's a junk house that needs to be demolished and removed. It could easily wipe that out with one particular parcel. And so staff has always, and that's why it's on here as one of the staff ideas, is because it's something that continues to, I certainly come through the zoning department, through concerns and complaints. It has sometimes been from board members who said, hey, we need to start addressing this. And so that's why when staff went through this process, that was one of their top 3 that they identified.
What's the criteria for a junk property? And sometimes junk, or is it just like we have like 40 vehicles in our yard?
We have that conversation, and there is some criteria, and in some cases it's a little more vague. Okay. Sometimes you have to work with public health because maybe it's more of a public health issue. And so Jason will work with public health sometimes too to take a look at those particular properties. And even between public health and our ordinances, there can be some real disagreements on whether or not this is a livable property and what does that mean for the life and safety of an individual who may be in there. Again, these can be very, very controversial as well, and we have some really tough conversations sometimes in-house of how do we handle properties and parcels like this. But you're right, sometimes it's in the eye of the beholder, but sometimes it's not, depending on You know, if they've got junk vehicles out there and they're leaking fluids and things of that nature, of course, then we've got the ability to go in and to take care of that. If it's a house that is half burned down and there's bears living in it, obviously we also have the ability to go in at that point in time. Usually those that are more extreme are the ones that would be easier, but we still don't have the resources to clean them up. It then becomes the ones that are a little more gray, where we have to figure out, okay, do we have resources? How much resources do we want to pour into it? Because certainly there's a legal process that there's an expense. You think of a corporation counsel, there's a process that the taxpayer would have as well to go through. It isn't something that we just can go out there and have done within 30 days. Usually it's a summons and complaint process, which gives them ample opportunity and time to correct that issue before then we take further court action. And so again, just looking at it from the staff perspective, this comes about because, you know, part image, part two, what we hear from residents and neighbors, as well as sometimes from board members.
I'm just wondering if, like, you know, are you potentially targeting those with lower income? Because it's like, you know, they don't have the ways or the means to, you know, they're driving older cars that have the means to dispose of them. And are there somewhat inexpensive ways that they could be aided?
I would think to tell you right now, there are hundreds of these places out there, and we definitely would not have a problem targeting the top 10.
Okay.
I mean, there are places where you can go out there and I don't know what their income ability is, but there's one I'm thinking of that has probably 30-some cars sitting on it that are not licensed, and they're just parked all over the place. Some people will say, well, that's my parts cars, or, so, you know, they think they have value, that's probably why they're keeping them.
When you get
scrap or
screening
something.
issues or something.
Some cases of old non-conforming salvage yards that date regulations, they can grow like an amoeba, and because what are you gonna do with it? And it becomes a potentially even a Superfund worthy site if it's been there for 40, 50 years of leaking stuff, right? Do we wanna even take title to that if we were to do that?
And these are great questions that would come by way of analyzing and looking at it if that was a priority of the committee. We would bring those questions forward as we were starting to look at developing a policy. So we had a playbook, if you will. So when residents came in and would be frustrated that we're looking at working with them, or if they feel that they're being targeted, we could say, here's the process we went through, here's what the committee and ultimately the county board decided on this policy, and we are simply implementing and following through on the policy that was adopted.
Another aspect too of actually having committed to do something like that tends to put the word on the street that
Sure does.
in order to clean up, maybe you better do that, or there will be consequences. You can't just continue to ignore it, you know?
And we don't have anything in our ordinance that says, you know, this many cars can be on a property or anything like that. I mean, you know, I think maybe 15 years ago, from what I think I was told, 20 years ago, the county was maybe gonna do something about limiting the number of unlicensed vehicles, but then I believe the ag community was a little bit against that for the fact, you know, they have lots of temporary licensing or no licensing on a lot of their equipment, stuff like that. So, I mean, you could even do things like, could target it based on zoning district, you know, you could say in a residential area, you can't have more than X amount of, you know, untitled cars or things like that to, you know,
And
not.
livestock.
Yeah, so I mean, there's ways you could tackle it, but again, if you're gonna put the rules in place, then we better have some funding. So if we're gonna, you know, follow up with the rule.
And the other thing to always remember is if you put a rule in place, people that had that before the rule is in place are grandfathered in, and you
Yes.
can't go after them
Yes.
unless you've got a nuisance or something else. But it's never as easy as it sounds.
One question I do have about the numbers is, so, you know, I'm seeing 11, 5, 3. What is the pool that we're pulling from? I mean, I know how many county board members there were, but like, how many people would have responded on these land use things? Was it the whole staff, or was it like anyone who had land use concerns? Like, is this 3 people, or is it 3 of?
So all the numbers are just county boards. As you recall, each county board
got it.
member, all
Okay.
21 of you had 3 votes that you could use on each standing committee. So The numbers that you see are simply the county board. This is very intentional because ultimately you folks are the policymakers. And so while we as staff can go through and have an iteration of this, at the end of the day, we defer to what you folks as policymakers desire first and foremost. That doesn't mean that what the staff came up with aren't good ideas and aren't ideas that you did, because you guys came up with the same ideas, you just prioritize things differently. And so if for some reason we identify things that we feel are still important to work on, for example, implementing an electronic permit system, that's something that's going to be important for staff. It's something from an efficiency standpoint, something from a tracking standpoint that we're going to probably continue to do that. And that would just be something that we would bring forward next budget season and things like that. So again, even though you may not prioritize it as a committee, that doesn't mean that staff might not be working on some of these over the course of time as well.
From a prioritization view, I'm just kind of looking at this and rethinking it, but I think providing zoning education to towns, it showed 5 at the county board level, could be rolled into number 3.
I agree. Yep.
Because it's part of the same thing, and then would be overwhelmingly strong consensus. And we saw, you heard 2 discussions about that today, right? Town of Trade Lake didn't respond at all on a request. Town of Jackson probably would have if it would have come, but we're curing that by changing our deadline so that in the next season, our deadline to get the notice to the town will be 2 weeks earlier in the month. We'll cut off application or hearing for longer than the minimum necessary, which is what we've been doing. So what that'll do is it'll put everybody, but I think Webb Lake, into the opportunity to put it on their agenda.
Webb Lake still gets it because there's the first Monday of the month.
Yeah, it makes it hard.
But they would be getting the notice before that, so, they might not have a whole lot of time to mull it over.
But I've told the towns, you can amend your agenda 24 hours before. You don't have to, some of the clerks are kind of entrenched a week ahead, but they're not doing public hearings. They can add stuff 11th hour if they need to talk about it. But the point is, it would have been really good on one of Jackson have been on their agenda, so some of those neighbors could have went to the town. And the town probably would have weighed in then. I don't think they thought anybody cared.
In that example too, I did not hear a peep from anyone until this morning when that petition came in.
Another example, they didn't really know the process.
Yeah.
You don't expect the citizens to.
Yeah.
But you do kind of hope the towns play, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in Jackson's case, speaking only for Jackson, because I've known those people for the clerk since I was like 5 years old. Anyway, he used to not even pass it on to the town if it came where she could put it on the agenda. They wouldn't even know it came to the clerk. That's what I was advocating. We should send, and in Ms. Washburn too, we did this, and start sending it to the chair and the clerk both, so that they're back in it before email, so that at least there's a chance they know, so that if they want to react, they can, right? And we were still pulling teeth sometimes to get reactions from towns, but in today's world, it's much more important than it was when it was all pretty laid back and simple. It's not anymore. The town person in the back nodding, so go ahead.
I'm trying to educate Siren Township now that I'm a Siren Township supervisor, that whenever anything comes up, we need to write a note, send it to Jason. And if they're not hesitant, but they've never done it before. I mean, I sat in on for 20 years on the township meeting, and you just didn't do it because it was just automatic. Well, but now they've got me on there saying, excuse me, but you need to do this because it's important. That's what I'm seeing in here. I like to listen and learn. That's why I'm here, to just listen and learn the different procedures and the protocol. And I can see how important it is for a township to say, yes, we think this is good, or no, we don't like it. It's because it does make a difference for, with, at least it gives you something more to think about. It's one more piece of information to the puzzle.
One of the changes after the 2010-30 plan process was that the towns were empowered. We used to joke about that this is the Full Employment Act for planners, and now the Full Employment Act for attorneys after the plan. Because it empowered the towns to have input that they really didn't have more than advisory before with the plans, and everybody said, yeah, nice plan, put it on the shelf, nobody ever looked at it. not the way it is anymore.
Well, and I think we're just at a super critical time, with so many people moving up here or expanding up here, spending more time up here, to not be overly restrictive, but to not be overly permissive. I mean, how are we gonna do this well? To not totally change the face of what's wonderful about Burnett County, and I think it's gonna be tricky.
We're gonna get a kick at the cat as we revisit the plan coming up. That's what we're gonna be needing to look at. What do we want to grow up to be here?
Yeah, because it's pretty important. I mean, I think the number of permits and things that are coming in, and I mean, is this kind of normal to have, you know, every time you have multiple conditional use permits? I mean, is that kind of, I mean, has that accelerated, or has that kind of always been?
You would have been on the committee about 3 years ago.
Oh, no, I believe it over the last few years.
We were having numbers of, when I would talk to some people I know at the state, that you do how many conditional use permits? Astounded how many conditional use permits. Tried to move them to things that we were permitting anyway, make permitted uses, you know? And we're gonna be revisiting all that. But yeah, this is nothing. The guys, the survivors of the 2019 on period will tell you that we did 4 consecutive days of conditional use here at the highway shop after we had to shut things down from the pandemic for a while, and all of them were contentious, right? Anyway.
If you would implement an electronic permit system that they're advocating on here, you could roll in hyperlinks on some of the other things for education. So let's say that somebody says, I wanna rezone from, you know, well, just this 2 different, you know, from zone ag 1 to 2 or whatever. This would be the cause and effect, you know, do you understand that this is what it's gonna do, and that this would be a conditional, or it's gonna be permanent, or whatever that means, so that they understand what that means. And then, it would just make it a lot easier. And then you're providing the education, and the 2-way platform, so that the towns could say, go to that site, and you're gonna learn what you need to know.
Well, you folks certainly have the prerogative to combine and smash and destroy and add on. I mean, this is really now in your hands. And so that's what I'm looking for, is do you want to combine some of these? Do you want to add to them? Again, I just want to make sure when we walk away that then I can add what are the 3 particular items that land use wants us to focus in on now moving forward. So right now is absolute. If you want to smash, burn, destroy, add, let's do it.
I mean, if you're gonna do it and invest the time in it, I mean,
Sure.
and once it's electronic, it's so easy to amend it
Easier, absolutely.
versus paper, and then distributing it on paper.
I think we're going a little bit in the right direction by changing it after the first of the year for applications coming in. Because it's gonna help improve us, land use committee, getting stuff to the towns so they can look at it, and either have input or not have input, you know. And, it's surprising, even on Facebook, I don't know who gets on Facebook, the, one on Yellow River, you know, you wouldn't believe how many people put on there it was gonna be, that now the new owner is gonna put a campground in there. Because it was also listed on the thing for the, one in town, for the Highway 71, with the campground. So, I couldn't believe some of the comments we had. Had one from Whitetails that corrected them on what was going on. Don't be spreading this stuff around. So they do get on the social media and come up with all kinds of ideas on it.
Home of conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Social media.
Of course, I don't ever comment on them, but I sure read them all.
Yeah, don't comment on them.
It's a trap. Don't
Yeah,
go
you
there.
get drug in.
So is there still, I mean, having links and everything is wonderful, but not everyone has that access or up there, I mean, no matter what, you're still gonna have to have paper.
Certain amount.
So you're just gonna do double duty, and I'm not saying not to do that, but I was just wondering, like, how big of a mountain is this? I mean,
Well, I mean, customer service, we want to provide the easiest format for all customers. Some are gonna say, I'm not going on the computer, I want a paper copy, and that'll probably still be that way for 20 or 30 more years, I'm guessing, so.
Look at with the sawmill, as an example.
Yeah, I can't even email him or anything.
Can't even call him.
Can't call him. You gotta call him and have him call you back sometime.
And the thing about that is the old joke about that is, you kind of play on words, but you don't want the words on the street to be it. If you have a zoning question, the last place you want to go to is the zoning department. That would be bad, right?
Yeah.
You want to try to accommodate everybody you can,
Yeah.
regardless of what it takes, because it's a lot easier to get it straight up front than correct it after the fact, right?
A lot of our secondary homeowners over the course, at least in my tenure here, have stated, well, I can't get up there before 4:30, or I need to take time off to get up early, or do you not have an electronic way of doing things and keeping business operating? So I think you're gonna see, just making sure we have more of a shotgun approach for everybody, just like for treasurer department, for example, we still have a lot of folks, you can do electronic payments, they come in. And they wanna come in because they wanna talk to people, they wanna press the flesh and say hi to people they haven't seen in the last year here. So, I mean, we're still gonna have a certain amount of that, and that's, I think, very okay for our community.
We advanced forced to by the pandemic to our public hearings
Correct.
remotely on YouTube, all that stuff. If we had that not happened, we probably wouldn't have got as far as we got, as quickly as we got. Who can participate without having to be here now?
What we're saying is, the number one priority is still develop a better two-way communication between everybody.
Right, we roll the last one into that, I think.
So zoning education to towns into the development.
Part of that,
Yeah,
the component of that.
as a component of that, put that in with the two-way communication.
And I think we're improving, but we can do better.
So with those two combined as number one, how do you feel about the other items here?
We're always gonna be reviewing ordinances.
I was just gonna say that, I mean, that's a constant practice, I mean.
I don't know if that has to be prioritized, because every time a question comes up, we start rethinking that ordinance.
This came up, as you may recall, with our retreat, and the conversation was, do we need to have corporation counsel more present at certain meetings? And so, that kind of parlays into it of, at what point does corporation counsel be more integrated with all of our committees in our county board relative to legal questions that may arise when you guys are having conversation and discussion, or, and looking at review of ordinances. Of course, that will always kind of occur, but, part of it was, does there need to be more integration with him, or corporation counsel in the future with this particular committee?
That's fun. I can see both sides of that one. I
can too.
I kind of
double-edged sword.
agree to a certain extent that we shouldn't be using him as a stalking horse.
Agreed.
Our policy, at the same time, we've got to be able to, hit the switch on the correction collar on our ankle or something if we start running amok, right? So I don't know quite how we do that, but that's important that we do.
Well, I think when he has set in, he doesn't want us to ask him, well, Dave, what do you think about this? But he certainly absorbs it, and he's willing to give us information, maybe in the next committee meeting or even, individually.
Yeah, I know he doesn't wanna be put on the spot when he's sitting here attending the meeting.
But it is nice to have him here just as a sounding board for.
And we haven't had it happen this year that much, but when the other side is armed with 2 or 3 lawyers, it's sort of nice to have one of your own present, And Dave was here with some of those high-profile things to monitor what was going on, but still, that's a different world than what we had been used to.
This is Supervisor Blomberg. I agree that when there are other lawyers weighing in at these public hearings, it would be very helpful if we had our legal counsel there as well.
do we generally know if there's gonna be?
We can kind of anticipate it, but no, you never know. you look at what seems like the most innocuous request, and then we'll have a mob. And then we'll think something we think should generate all kinds of controversy, nobody comes.
Yep.
It's the nature of the beast sometimes, doesn't change the outcome necessarily.
And, I mean, I even, a couple months ago, I don't think I knew Mr. Benson was gonna be here for that campground on Parida Road. I mean, so that guy brought they don't have to tell us ahead of time, hey, we're gonna have legal counsel there. So it's just a matter of, oh, I'm representing this client when they stand up to do their public hearing portion.
And I guess I'd throw as a slightly bit of a wisecrack is that occasionally when they have a lawyer and we don't, and a committee member acts as one, you get sued.
So, yeah, I don't know how you anticipate, I mean, like Craig said, there's some that we know.
All you have to do is use the word campground.
Yeah.
You're almost certain that it has campground on either side.
And again, just because this was identified as, the second by the entire county board does not mean that this is what you folks as a committee feel is important. So we can push that one down if we want. It's really up to you folks.
I personally see even though it doesn't have any votes, the implementing the electronic permit system, would roll a few of the other items into it and.
That one was read in by staff, but not by
Right.
board, but I think it's gonna be the case anyway, as Nate said.
Mm-hmm.
That's, kind of rolled in with ordinance amendments and development as well.
Communication. And even the platform for people to download data and files, that can be taken care of with access.
It can, some of these are separate when staff identified them simply because they're different systems and there's going to be a different structure, different costs, different maintenance of it to be able to manage those. And so that's why, they prioritize looking at a permit system first, because I believe that's where more questions have been raised and more, the desire to have that versus on the GIS side, and those data files are really important, but oftentimes it's maybe not called for by the general resident. It might be developers, it might be realtors, it might be folks that use it less often, whereas the permit system, everybody who's going to do anything with their land is going to be required for permit.
Although I would say that the information available on the GIS
It's very good.
is, know how to use it.
Yeah.
Invaluable for working on a permit. We get a lot better quality stuff than we used to, because people who know enough to print that out. And they can do evaluations that would maybe cause them to decide not to apply, having it available.
How many of the hits are from county board members? I use it a lot.
Oh, yeah. Saves a lot of steps sometimes. You look at topography, wetlands, everything. Of course, I'm a geography major, so
You think if you provide sample applications online, people get the impression that they're actually filling out the application and not a sample? And they'll just figure that, well, my application's in, now I can go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I don't know.
We have a sample, stamp across it.
Yeah, we have a watermark.
Watermark kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for people to know, because I'm sure there's a lot of people hemming and hawing at the window. It's like, oh, I don't know that information.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the sample wouldn't be a fillable form, it would be completed in a PDF. You would just be viewing it to say, okay, do I have what shows over here? My property, my address, my phone number, my other contact, what I'm asking for. Because in ours, the sample would be, to take any of your permits, when it talks about brief description, we would kind of give an idea of what we're expecting out of a brief description. Location on your property, things of this nature.
This is what a plot plan looks like.
Absolutely, yeah. Just trying to give more information to, again, all those folks completing it, because, we live and breathe this, but most people, this is uncomfortable They have not spent time with zoning. They've maybe filled out 1 or 2 permits in their life, perhaps, and relative to development of their land, and so they don't know.
How much window time do you have, Jason, on a weekly basis, talking to people about these applications, any application?
5 or 6 probably.
Pardon me?
5 or 6 probably a week, 5 or 6 hours.
Is that, hours? Okay. I still think that education, when they come in here or call in, huge. What did you say? In little things on how to fill out that application. Because there's things that are missing in those applications every month that we sit and look at.
Yeah, you know, some of these you don't even hear from the people until the application comes in the mail, so you haven't had a chance to even talk to them.
Yeah.
I help people out a lot with the Board of Adjustment, the variance application, because that one's like 9 pages long, so that one's really gets into a lot of questions that people don't understand. So I always tell people when they call, hey, you know, shoot me a draft version if you want. I can go over it, or we can sit down and meet and talk about it, or I can't fill it out for you, but I can try to give you some key words maybe to use to try to make your point. So I'm always willing to do that.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, there was, the applications are filled out, but they're not very specific when they, when we see them.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of these
are objective.
Well, and a lot of the people, and, you know, sometimes I don't know what you guys are looking for, so I'm trying to anticipate, how much detail they should put on their application. A lot of people don't even have the detail yet because they're like, well, I'm not gonna spend a bunch of money doing a bunch of design work until I get this approval. But you guys want to know the details ahead of time before you give the approval. So we're always in this little catch-22 here of trying to navigate in between what they wanna provide, but some of that stuff costs money that they don't wanna spend.
Well, and it has to be kind of a generic application. You can't anticipate
Yeah.
every single thing you're gonna apply for.
The public hearing is the point to flush out the details, because I've had people ask me too, why don't you give a recommendation in your staff report on approval or denial? I said, well, how am I supposed to do that before the public hearings happened? I don't, like this one today, I didn't know there'd be 15 people with a petition and people showing up, and I didn't know people would have concerns about the road and different things like that. So how can I write a recommendation before the public hearing? So the public hearing is supposed to flush out all those items. So then you know kind of what to look for or what concerns people have. And I think that's why some of the counties do the meeting 1 month and then the approval the second month, because then they have staff write, here's a proposed motion that would address all the items, because you guys are kind of trying to do that on the fly right now, address all the public hearing comments and make an approval the same day.
Right, and that can be perilous. We know that, because you can, we're sometimes pushing the envelope and trying to incorporate everything, and we miss something or don't state it correctly, we wind up on appeal. And, we've been pretty good about prevailing, but you never know. That's the other, but how do you decide which ones you're gonna do that to? Because some of these today were so simple, they did not need to have another month to make a decision.
I have a question for Jason, that, the staff does security on there. What do you mean by security?
Well, that was department heads, when we had our department head little, retreat. That was what, they brought up as concerns. I don't even know if it was me, because that would have only been one vote out of the 20 or so roughly that were at that meeting. I think some of the people in the building though see big crowds and get a little nervous, or I think maybe people, as they leave the public hearing, might be making comments that we're not necessarily hearing here, but maybe other departments are hearing, you
Remember
know.
at the highway shop, we had law enforcement
We
present
had some threats right at us.
because there were so many, people with placards and signs and
Yep.
large-scale livestock public hearing.
Yep.
Probably was maybe the highest attendance of anything ever in this building. I don't know that. Packed, right? Those kinds of things generate a need for some order to be maintained beyond, we could appoint Chuck as sergeant at arms. Probably wouldn't want to do that. You're the biggest guy here, that's why.
I can tell you that, so you're aware, public safety last week did identify courtroom security and a second courtroom joined together as their second item. So they believe that, and they want there to be a conversation of how are we going to better secure the entirety of this facility for our staff, for guests, for applicants, you name it, for any of those folks coming through these doors. And so that's something that they're already going to be looking at as one of their goals. So you may not need to worry about that from a public hearing perspective, knowing that that's going to be considered when they're looking at a plan on security for the entire government center.
Good point.
And I don't think that they're meaning that we gotta have badges walking around here.
Not necessarily.
It's just that sometimes doors need to be shut or locked or different ways to in and out of the building.
Well, so even to the extent of, capacity, for many people can be in here for an event, right? That's why we got that alternate venue. We did that back in the nineties, I think. Ben, I wasn't working here that, in the 2000s, at the Webster School cafeteria for shoreline zoning public hearings, because it had seating capacity for enough people, and the committee was up on the stage, and, it worked really well. But during the pandemic, the school wasn't exactly welcoming for us doing that, We never did do that. That's why the highway shop, to maintain social distancing. But that having something kind of an arrangement made isn't a bad idea in a normal situation.
And I think just procedures and options, because let's say it's just packed, and it's like, I just don't really feel like encountering a whole bunch of people that are going to say, what about this, what about that? It's like, can someone walk out with me? Can I go out a back door? I mean, it's like, are there, what are our options as far as maybe not wanting to walk out through
You did do that at the highway shop. Committee was access to the front of the building and public at the back, because of just the sheer number.
Even here, it's like, I guess I don't even really know the layout of the courthouse, or, of the building. Do a self-tour, I suppose, guided tour.
Even when we have something, then that part is, that hearing part is done, then 15 people leave, and all we do is go as far as the door here, and we adjourn, and they're still there talking. Sometimes can be uncomfortable to move through that crowd. I can see where that would happen.
All right, there should be some degree of security comfort for the supervisors when we do things like that. Again, that hasn't been a real problem at all, just the perception.
And it's more of a perception than it is a.
Biggest problem out at the highway shop. The COVID. Rather than that, it's.
I could imagine if we do ag amendments, we're probably gonna have some crowds. And if we ever have a public hearing for a CAFO, I would assume that would be.
That's gonna draw.
Campgrounds, I think we've got though, that issue with the ordinance changes, that issue I think is not, is volatile.
Profile is lowered.
Yeah, you know, I think that issue, we're not gonna get the 100 people at the public hearing for a campground, knock on wood, hopefully, anymore. Yeah, I think, you know, CAFO issue, whenever that comes through, will be a little challenging for crowd management.
I think on some of that, a lot of it is managing information, because like on campgrounds and on KFOs, I think people have their ideas about what something means. They have their preconceived ideas, and that's not what it means. And, you know, even if it's, you know, if this is what it says, this is what it means. I mean, because I think a lot of people are upset about something that isn't an actual effect. And so even if there's information that can be given somehow, that it's like, you know, if we amend this, it doesn't mean, you know, it's going to put this farmer out of business, or it's going to allow whatever. I think a lot of it is managing information, because that's why people get upset.
Which goes back to our communication
Yeah.
goal. You know, seems to all, a lot of it, including the security and everything, just kind of goes back to that communication.
Because if you just, I mean, if people are relying on letters to the editor for all their information, they may or may not know the effects of what's actually being discussed.
Like Norm's example there of Facebook, how it had a whole bunch of misinformation on it. I mean, I think we even talked about this maybe a few years ago, you know, does zoning want to have like a Facebook page or something? But, you know, it obviously would have to turn off comments or something, because, you know, that, I see that being really controversial sometimes, but, you know, would that help to get information out there that's correct and not?
Think of like the online petitions we were encountering, where people were signing them from, you know, foreign countries. They're not necessarily people that were residents or property owners in Brevard County. You know, so we had dozens of pages and hundreds of names, but it wasn't very useful for anything because you couldn't possibly vet them.
This is Supervisor Blomberg. Regarding communications, we need to do a better job of educating the public to send correspondence, especially emails, to either Jason or to forward to the committee, or to all of our committee members, as opposed to sending them individually, person by person by person, because we have no idea when they send them individually like that if the other committee members have gotten them, and so then we wind up having to forward them to Jason to send them out to others. It gets to be very confusing and complicated.
A good point. That's happened. I did it too.
Yeah, and I don't know how you get around that, as far as, you know, if a person lives in your district, they're probably gonna think it's their role to contact you as their, you know, elected official. How do we encourage them to contact 7 people instead of just their one, or know to include me on it? Yeah, we struggle with this. Every item that comes up that generates lots of emails or letters, then we're passing emails back and forth and correspondence between each other.
This isn't really on the list, but it's a good point to throw in, that if you get it on your private email for some reason, it can happen, or on your cell phone, which can happen, you're suddenly arguably conducting county business on a private account. So forward that to Jason, get it on the record ASAP, which then cures that. But under an open records request,
Take a look at all your
you can
emails.
ask all your, you know, examine all your own personal accounts. That's why it's best to have a landline or something if you don't want to take calls on your cell phone. But those are probably not at issue. But it can, you know, from personal experience, I can tell you that your own private email becomes subject to public record, open records request if it's perceived as being used that way. So, just again, a reminder to everybody. If it happens, just put it on the record, and then that solves the problem.
Well, sometimes it seems like you're getting things at the last moment, and there really isn't time to read or digest them, you know? So it's like, I don't know if that's a reason for postponement, but we're receiving a lot of information of people that have input that's important to them, that.
And then that's unfortunate too, is that people, we can't put a deadline on public commentary. It's right up till the very end. But if somebody wants comments, and I'll use mine as an example, on the Friday night at 9:30 before the public hearing on the following Tuesday, can't get his email to go to the county, so sends it to my private account. I forwarded it by Jason then, and he had it. But that person, it was important to that person to get it in. And yet created a perception of business outside of the public examination, you know? So it's a weird conundrum, but it's something that can happen. And we can't prevent that from happening. Once you receive it, you got it. You have to then deal with it.
And that's the point of the public hearing. Somebody could, tell you right 2 minutes before you have to vote on an issue, something that nobody thought of, or, and yeah, you do have the option to postpone meetings, if you need to digest that stuff. I always do tell people, on some of these maybe bigger, requests or something, people will often ask me, how do I submit input to the committee? And I always say, well, you can send emails, send letters. I always try to say, don't do it, 10 minutes before the meeting starts, because the committee isn't going to have time to digest it or read it. I usually tell people to show up in person. I think that makes the biggest impact. Not that I'm trying to drive crowds here, but I do say, I think if a committee member has to look you in the eye when you're talking to them, that it probably carries a little more weight than a chain letter that you change your signature on. I said that, stuff doesn't seem like you took a lot of effort into making comment, but, yeah, I don't know how we get around that stuff.
Sometimes the applicant will even bring in a card for you to stick in the computer. That happens.
Yep.
What are you gonna do? Say we can't do the meeting today because we didn't have this in advance? But,
Yep.
but it would have been plenty of cause to postpone, which I think is what we have to do anyway.
Do we have three yet?
A lot of good discussion, I will tell you that. Maybe I can just weigh in here a little bit. Looking at the review of ordinance and policy relative to legalities and legal challenges, maybe that's something we can pull off, that I can have more conversation with Dave and Corporation Counsel, just generally speaking, because this is something that it's not just impacting you folks, but something that every committee from time to time has said, boy, it'd be nice to ask legal this question. I've heard that once, I've heard 100 times at different committee meetings. It's everything from HHS to public safety to infrastructure, you name it. And so that's maybe something we can pull off, and I can figure out how to better work with Dave with his existing schedule, knowing that the majority of his work is with child support, but as he looks to retire in the coming years as well, we may want to reallocate some of his time, or that Corporation Counsel's time, I should say, to other committees and work that they're doing. Maybe that'd be an easy one to pull off for the time being. And one I would, maybe want to have more conversation around is what I think too, providing sample applications, which we can then address even how do you communicate with elected officials? What is that kind of how-to do? I think it would be very beneficial in addition to those permit pieces. So if they want to engage elected officials, then they know here's everything, and we give it to them in a very easy format, which then includes staff or anybody else that they feel would be important. So we try to connect people in to the communication stream here a little bit better, perhaps better. But one of the items that I would like to have maybe some conversation on is looking at housing growth and development. This is something that Burnett County Development Association, who's really charged with looking at the development of jobs and economic development, has a lot of discussion about, but they don't really have the ability to effectuate what might be necessary to accomplish more of this. And I think every village is trying to figure it out, but I think they're struggling as well. And maybe the county needs to take a broader approach and look at it countywide. Is there something the county can do, either through ordinances that we have in the towns that we take care of zoning and assist them with it, and with the villages from a partnership standpoint? Because we know we can create jobs all day long. I've
confident we can do that. But if we can't have housing for people to be able to come and stay at, those jobs aren't going to get filled. And so I think from an economic development standpoint, we've got some really good things cooking, but we don't have the housing. And we see it here. When we talk to the school district, it's the same issue. They can't bring teachers in. They can't bring professionals. Our existing businesses can't hire because there is not housing within a reasonable distance. And we need to really start to consider that across the county.
Because what's good for Grantsburg is obviously going to be good for Styron and Webster, and then all the towns inclusive of that.
Like, they got their census numbers back. The growth is 30% previous.
And unfortunately, when you look at the growth of some of our numbers, we're aging, and we're going to age fast. We're not going to age as fast as Bayfield County, but for example, they're very active right now, and they're coming under some scrutiny. I think rightly so, but at the same time, it's because they're trying to do what they think is right for the next 100 years, is they've kind of created themselves as a developer, and they've purchased property, and they're put on RFP to bring in developers to then develop parcels that would be assisted through their housing association to be able to operate and run. So just like we have a Burnett County Housing Association, I finally, after 9 years, reached out to them. They had some conversation, and we're bringing them to admin committee in October to continue to engage them, because that's a huge vehicle to be able to bring resources in for the development of housing. But with that, I think we really need to look at other opportunities, either through zoning or high-density planning, maybe even it's cluster development planning, things like that, that maybe drive down the cost per unit. So it's not, you know, affordable housing like people think, but housing that's affordable for those making a living wage. And right now, we know that's really difficult in Gwinnett County. We need to try to figure out those pieces. So I had a say, which I don't, but if I had a say, that would be something I would think would be really important for us to look at, because it impacts the entirety of our socioeconomic system, our education system within Burnett County.
Ultimately, it was gonna filter down to the committee, because when
Absolutely.
people want to, try these different housing things, it's generally somehow not conforming or not happening where we think it should.
Well, shouldn't most of that stuff happen where they have municipal services though?
It might not. I mean, that's just it. I think that's where we have the ability, and we're gonna have to be creative in a rural area
To look at other opportunities outside of just where there's
maybe the easiest infrastructure to work with. That helps maybe drive down the expense per unit over, a long period of time, but perhaps that's where the county gets involved in helping with larger on-site systems that aren't monitored by us, but we assist maybe in incentivizing it in areas where they don't necessarily have those municipal services.
Again, I think we need to be really creative and take an approach of everything needs to be on the table.
And can the county effectuate any change, or can they not? Are we going to sit on the sidelines, or are we going to try to actively be engaged? Because it's going to have an impact, without a doubt, on economic development if we can't direct housing. It already is.
And I tell you what, where I came from in my previous work, where we were looking at housing and economic development, they were hand in hand, and we spent a tremendous amount of money because we knew that we had to do that, and we were willing to pay the money as a community to be able to drive business and drive housing, because it was going to be a payoff long-term for all the businesses and for those, the local economy. So again, if we don't do something, just remember, everybody else still is. So I think we just need to be thinking about that. Whether it's a priority, doesn't really matter, because I'm going to keep working on some of those pieces as well, and it's going to come up with the Comprehensive Planning Steering Committee. It's going to come up with my discussions with the Burnett County Housing Association, because you as the county board created them. So we're going to continue to poke and prod and try to make that vehicle work a little bit more efficient for us. But I think, certainly it's going to have to be in partnership with you folks. But it's up to you. Again, this is why we're here, is to discuss these items. Again, we have one that we've all agreed upon. I would like to get two more. I do think the sample applications with, again, some of the maybe real easy to read, broke down information on how do you attend a public hearing even? What does it look like when you attend it? Expectations as you attend it. Some of those very simple things that, we take for granted, but we don't necessarily have in place, I think would be helpful for folks. So we give them the conditional use permit with that. Here, if you come to the public hearing, here's how it works. Step by step, the top 10 steps of a public hearing along those lines. I think anything we can do to make it easier for residents who aren't used to our business on a regular basis is
what we should be working on.
And so they don't speak on a term, like what happens today.
The sample applications and questions along with electronic permit systems kind of integrate again as well. Part of the expansion of it.
How will we combine those two?
I agree,
Yeah,
we're gonna be working on
payment
one.
aspect could be into that too. All of those sort of are in the same niche of development. And actually, the two items about following comprehensive plan goes back into the communication of governmental things. One another element of that is paying attention to the comprehensive plan when you're communicating what the decision process is.
And I appreciate that in the comments. Is that something you're throwing in?
In the staff report?
Yeah.
Yep, yeah, I put the comp
Yeah,
plan.
it's like, I just find that extremely helpful, because it's like, you know, even if we've reviewed it, it's like, it's more on your radar.
And it should integrate with the towns as well,
Yeah.
because the plans originate with them.
Yep.
And they
That
can
goes back-
consolidate as well, I think.
And that goes back to, we spend a bunch of money on the comprehensive plan, let's use it, instead of parking it on the shelf, so.
Right, well, in a way, we're compelled to because of the, in spite of some meddling by the legislature in some of that language, it still requires all zoning actions to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, so, yeah. Foundation of the whole thing, really, didn't used to be.
Erin's good about that. I know the meetings I've been to, you go back to the plan.
Have we narrowed it down to we almost have three now?
We combined a few into two, and so
Within number two, we'd be looking at sample applications, frequently asked questions, electronic permit, and payment system.
We have like 10 now, because we just combined them all, so.
Yeah, you're creating more work for us, I love it. Thank you.
It would change the color of the housing growth incentives. Change that, include that.
I think
That
that,
is really important.
I think it is too, and I think it's one of those where we didn't have a lot of discussion at the county board retreat, and, you know, my intent was really to allow you folks to bring the ideas forward and discuss as you felt was important. But
From my perspective and, you know, the lens that I look through between all the standing committees and the county board and the other organizations outside of Burnett County that I sit on and work with, I think it's a critical piece. And I think the county has a role to play. I'm not quite sure what that role should be. That's gonna be something that folks are gonna have to really help design and help facilitate. But I think it's something that we should have more conversation moving forward.
I do too, because it's one that doesn't end up being contentious, because anything that's more concentrated where it normally hasn't been, then everyone around there is crabby. And so I think it deserves some attention.
Given with a lot of other businesses in the county, that's a very big problem. First of all, the biggest problem is finding help, run their business, their doors open, but the underlying problem with the help is no place for them to come and stay while they work. So I think that housing is a very important, besides finding a place to work, places to live. Well, a lot of places are, for instance, when the rec changed hands, became the rec down there, they get a lot of their, they sold all their cabins off, and part of the payment for their cabins was they had to put in so many hours of work at the bar each month or whatever. So there's a lot of people around that are trying to do things in the scope of how they can find workers and house them. Pretty big, important issue for us.
Maybe
incentive isn't the right word on there, maybe it's housing development and plan, or master planning for housing across Burnett County, something along those lines. Maybe incentives is the word that some people got hinged on of why they wouldn't vote for it, because I don't think we necessarily need to just look at dollars and valuation. I think really it's through incentivizing them of ordinance creation to make things maybe easier, one-stop shop, working more again with the villages as well and giving them the assistance that they might need that they don't have today would be something that we'd be looking at as well, that umbrella.
Good point. Just
I got communication.
a little bit and roll it in.
I was just gonna bring up the communications with the 23 different, municipalities throughout. I think it's 23, isn't it, including the villages?
With the 24, I think.
24, okay. To be close touch with those, with, the fathers or the, elected officials in those communities. They don't know what's going on. A lot of them just stay the heck away from the county completely. They know that there's a housing problem, or, I don't know, but they do. But they don't want their land. Don't want their land turned into, housing, because it should stay hunting. It goes on out there, believe me. The area should stay hunting area. So they're not gonna allow any, they're gonna push away any development of land.
I think these are good conversations that are gonna come up. These are growing pains that a community like ours is gonna experience regardless. So whether we start to look at and try to develop and kind of drive that ship as a county, or we don't, we're still gonna run into those. Because as people retire here and people continue to come to this community, their mindset of where they may be coming from is very different versus maybe growing up in a rural area and living in a rural area their entire life. I've been working with a resident who, from Hanover, Minnesota, and moved up here and is developing a cabin, and boy, why isn't it done this way? Why isn't it done that way? And I think the more and more folks like that move to this area, the more and more questions like that they're going to ask. So and I would rather be on the leading edge of trying to figure out what it is you folks want to develop, because you folks are the policymakers versus people coming in and us giving grease to that squeaky wheel and maybe doing something that isn't great for the entirety of Burnett County for the next 50 years, but we're doing it, in a reactionary way because this is what we're hearing from one or two people now that are coming in. And so I just think it's very important for us to be more methodical and take that time. And now is your opportunity. If we wait another 5 or 10 or 15 years, where more folks are retiring here and coming here, which I think is good for the community, but I think it's going to create even more challenges if we're not preparing for that. Bring up a great point.
We have 3 now?
We do. We do. Stop. No more talking. Yes. So what will happen, just so you're aware, is once we go through all the standing committees between September and October, I'm going to kind of minimize and simplify this document for all the county board members. And then what will happen is on a quarterly basis, I'll be working with staff within those particular committees of jurisdiction, as well as myself, and on a, again, regular basis, probably quarterly, bringing back some updates, as well as here's where we're at today. We need folks to weigh in as we start to develop these programs and plans moving forward. And what I stress with public safety is just because it's a goal and a priority, we also know things are dynamic. It's not static. And so there are going to be other things that may come up, and you guys are going to want us to push it off. Or we're going to get so far, we're getting 80% down the road, and then we start to have this conversation about what the financial impacts are. And that may lead to it becoming a different priority, if you will. It may be dropping on the list, and that's okay. And I want to stress that that's absolutely the way that these processes should go. But I think it's really important that now that we have some common goals, we can start moving forward and bringing you that information, because, again, eventually this is what I think the general public is going to demand from Burnett County long term. So getting ready and getting prepared and understanding how this process works these first few years, I think it's going to be good and educational for all of us.
So next steps are coming in the next month or two. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we running a shuttle to the WCA conference?
Seriously, we should be. If you've not talked to Wanda yet, speak with Wanda. I think she has vehicles lined up. I'm not sure if she has the time that we'll plan to leave here on that Sunday or not. Yeah.
I've blasted the way out.
Okay. There's been a couple changes with at least one board member.
That's the black and orange bus. All of us.
How many are attending?
I believe there's 13.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Which is excellent. It's great.
Other years I've driven myself because I have been coming from like St. Cloud. Get willing to ride for a change.
Talk to Wanda. She's coordinating all that.
Future agenda item.
So for next month, we have, the manufactured home park in Siren, that will be back on the agenda. The Highway 70 campground rezone in the town of Meenan. And then there's a storage facility in the town of Swiss. So those are the three public hearing items.
Okay,
What about the one that was postponed in meeting,
been withdrawn?
the river?
Yeah, the one on the river has been withdrawn. 20-some lot development on County Road A in the Yellow River. That one's off.
Question I have, and anything on the campground on Isle Span Lake?
Not that I'm aware of.
Didn't that go to court though?
Probably got delayed again. I don't know. I could look it up in CCAP right now.
Golden Road, you mean?
Yeah. No.
He's talking the Volcan one.
Okay.
October 3rd,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
last we heard. Judge was, at least some other, something prevented the judge, personal business, from considering it in July when we were going to.
Anything else?
I guess just a question on, you know, if there's, you know, something coming back on the agenda, how soon do we get, you know, they've updated or, you know, submitted additional drawings or additional plans? How far in advance do we generally see that? I guess what I'm wondering is, like, is there a means to, you know, to avoid delays in approving, disapproving, or postponing something? You know, could we say, oh, you know, it'd be helpful if we had this additional information? Or isn't that something you can even request of an applicant? You know, because, like, let's say, it's like, it would really be helpful if, you know, if it were staked, or if you had XYZ in extra information in a sanitary plan or something. Otherwise, things seem like they just get pushed off, or I don't feel like you have enough information to make a decision. I don't know the mechanism for that.
Yeah, and I don't know, kind of on a case-by-case basis, because I don't know what information you're gonna need to make the.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering, it's like how soon once we get the packet, if we respond back, it's like I might feel uncomfortable. It's like, oh, well, I don't feel comfortable making a decision unless it's staked out, and it may or may not have been required. And not that you're going to require it, but it's like, I just hate to, I don't know. Sometimes until we get the information, we don't know what else we'd like to see.
Kind of question.
We've done that, and when a person never continuously couldn't provide what we requested, and we gave them extensions, eventually we dismissed.
Okay.
But if it's something we need, I don't know that there's any way to get that out until we convene as a meeting.
Right.
And then raise it, and if it's significant enough, we could give the applicant a period of time to provide that information. That would postpone. But really, sometimes on things that are contentious and complicated, you need to do that. That's all I could say.
Yeah.
Good motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr.
I'll second that motion. I'm ready to go.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was a post that sounded like.
That was Brent.
Before you guys leave, do you guys want to
Oh.
sign,
You have to sign one of the resolutions here real quick, please. The Trade Lake one.
I'll